The blizzard had come without warning, turning the New Mexico territory into a white hell that swallowed everything in its path. And Yates Anderson knew he was either going to find shelter soon or become another frozen corpse that wouldn't be discovered until spring thaw. The year was 1877, and he had been riding from Santa Fe toward Las Vegas, New Mexico, carrying supplies and a heavy heart after burying his brother 2 weeks prior. The snow had started as gentle flakes during the afternoon, then transformed into a raging tempest that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. His horse, a sturdy roan named Copper, struggled through the deepening drifts, breath coming out in great clouds of steam. Yates pulled his coat tighter, the cold seeping through every layer despite the thick wool and leather. His face felt like it had been slapped repeatedly with ice, his beard crusted white with frozen moisture. He squinted through the driving snow, searching desperately for any sign of shelter. The landscape had become alien, all familiar landmarks erased by the white curtain that surrounded him. His fingers were going numb inside his gloves, and he knew he needed to find cover immediately or risk losing them to frostbite. Then, through a momentary break in the storm, he spotted what looked like a rocky outcropping ahead, the kind that might provide enough shelter to wait out the worst of the blizzard. He urged Copper forward, the horse responding gamely despite obvious exhaustion. As they drew closer, Yates realized it was better than he had hoped, a natural overhang that created a shallow cave, protected from the wind on 3 sides. He dismounted stiffly, his legs barely supporting his weight after hours in the saddle. Leading Copper into the shelter, he tied the horse securely and immediately began gathering what dry wood he could find beneath the overhang, grateful that the snow hadn't penetrated this far back. His hands fumbled with his flint and steel, taking several attempts before he managed to coax a flame to life. The small fire began to grow, pushing back the deadly cold just enough to remind him what warmth felt like. That was when he saw her. At first, he thought it was just a pile of snow and debris against the back wall of the shelter. Then the firelight grew stronger, and he realized with a shock that it was a person, a woman, partially buried in snow that had blown in before the overhang provided complete protection. She was curled on her side, dressed in buckskin clothing that marked her as Apache, her long black hair matted with ice. Yates rushed to her side, his fatigue forgotten. He brushed the snow away frantically, fear gripping his chest as he checked for signs of life. Her skin was cold, so cold that touching her sent a shock through him, but when he pressed his fingers to her neck, he felt a faint pulse. She was alive, barely. Without hesitation, he lifted her carefully and brought her closer to the fire. She was light in his arms, which worried him, suggesting she had been without proper food for some time. He laid her down gently on his bedroll, the only padding available, and immediately began working to warm her. He knew from experience in the Colorado mountains that warming someone too quickly could be dangerous, but leaving her in her current state would certainly mean death. He removed her moccasins, finding her feet dangerously cold, and began rubbing them gently to restore circulation. Her hands were the same, fingers like ice. He built up the fire more, sacrificing some of his precious wood supply because a life hung in the balance. Then he removed his own coat and laid it over her, adding his extra blanket from his saddlebag on top of that. For the next hour he worked tirelessly, keeping the fire fed, occasionally rubbing her hands and feet, watching for any sign of consciousness. The storm continued to rage outside their shelter, the wind howling like a pack of wolves, but inside their small sanctuary the temperature slowly rose. Yates studied her face in the firelight. She was young, probably close to his own 24 years, with high cheekbones and strong features. Even in her current state, he could see she was beautiful. A nasty bruise darkened one side of her face, and he noticed other injuries, scrapes and cuts that suggested she had been through something traumatic before the cold had claimed her. He heated water from his canteen in his small tin cup, holding it over the flames until it was warm. When he touched the cup to her lips, trying to get some of the liquid into her mouth, she remained unresponsive. He tried again, being patient, letting tiny amounts trickle between her lips. Some of it seemed to go down, which he took as an encouraging sign. Night fell, though it was hard to tell with the storm blocking out any natural light. Yates kept his vigil, feeding the fire, monitoring his patient, and occasionally checking on Copper, who seemed content enough in the shelter with some oats from the supplies. The cowboy's own exhaustion pulled at him, but he fought it off, afraid that if he slept, the fire might die and take the woman's slim chances with it. It was sometime deep in the night when he heard the first sound from her, a soft moan that made him lean forward instantly. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. He spoke softly, not wanting to startle her. "You are safe. You are by a fire. Can you hear me?" There was no response, but a few minutes later her eyes did open just slightly. They were dark, almost black in the firelight, and filled with confusion and pain. She tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged, too quiet for him to understand. Yates leaned closer. "Do not try to talk yet. You have been out in the cold. You need to rest and get warm." Her eyes focused on him with difficulty, and he saw fear flash through them. He understood. She had awakened to find herself in close quarters with a white man, a scenario that likely brought nothing but bad associations for an Apache woman. The history between their peoples was written in blood and betrayal, and he knew she had no reason to trust him. "I mean you no harm," he said quietly, keeping his hands visible and his movements slow. "I found you in the snow. I am just trying to help you get warm. The storm is still bad outside. We are sheltered here." She continued to stare at him, her breath coming in short gasps. He could see her trying to assess the situation, trying to determine if she was in danger. Slowly her eyes moved to take in her surroundings, the fire, the cave, his horse, the storm visible beyond their shelter. Her gaze returned to him, and some of the acute fear seemed to diminish, though wariness remained. "Water," he offered, holding up the cup. "It is warm. It will help." After a moment's hesitation, she gave the slightest nod. He helped her lift her head, supporting it with his hand, and brought the cup to her lips. She drank in small sips, her throat working with obvious difficulty. When she had taken as much as she could manage, she laid her head back down, exhaustion clear on her face. "Rest now," Yates said gently. "You are safe here. I will keep the fire going." Her eyes were already closing, her body demanding the sleep it needed to heal. But just before she slipped back into unconsciousness, her lips moved, forming words so quiet he had to strain to hear them. "Thank you." Those two words, spoken in clear but accented English, touched something deep in Yates's chest. He nodded, though she could no longer see him, and settled in to continue his watch. The storm raged for 2 more days. During that time, Yates carefully tended to his unexpected companion, rationing their limited supplies, keeping the fire alive, and gradually helping her regain her strength. She slept much of the first day, waking periodically to accept water and small amounts of food. He learned her name was Mika Hawthorne, a name that reflected both her Apache heritage and her mixed ancestry, her father having been a scout named Thomas Hawthorne who had married into the tribe before being killed in a raid years ago. She spoke little at first, and Yates did not push her. He could see the trauma in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden movements, the haunted look that came over her face when she thought he was not watching. As her physical condition improved with warmth and food, it became clear that her ordeal had been about more than just the storm. On the second night, as the wind continued to howl outside but the worst of the snowfall seemed to be letting up, Mika finally spoke more than a few words at a time. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. "I was with a group traveling to join relatives," she said quietly, her voice stronger now but still bearing the roughness of her recent ordeal. "We were attacked by men, white men looking for sport. They killed the others, 2 women and old man. They were going to take me, but I managed to escape into the rocks. I ran. I ran until I could not run anymore, and then the storm came. I thought I would die in the snow. Part of me wanted to." Yates felt anger rise in his chest at her words, anger at the men who had committed such violence, anger at a world that allowed such things to happen. "I am sorry," he said, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. "I am sorry that happened to you. I am sorry about your companions." She looked at him across the fire, studying his face as if trying to understand him. "You are different from those men, I can see it, but you are still white. You are still part of the people who have taken everything from mine." He could not argue with that. The history was there, undeniable and ugly. The Apache people had been fighting to hold onto their lands and their way of life for decades, facing broken treaties, forced relocations, and systematic destruction of their culture. That some had fought back with violence of their own did not erase the larger injustice. "I cannot change what has been done," Yates said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I cannot speak for all white people any more than you can speak for all Apache. I can only tell you what I believe. I believe that what was done to you and your people is wrong. I believe that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of the color of their skin or where they come from. And I believe that when you find someone in need, you help them if you can. That is what my mother taught me before she passed." Mika's expression softened slightly. "Your mother sounds like she was a good woman." "She was. She died when I was 16. Fever took her. My father passed a year later, some say of a broken heart. It has been just me and my brother since then, working small ranches, taking odd jobs. Now it is just me. My brother was killed last month in a fight that should never have happened." "I am sorry for your loss," Mika said, and he could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. Loss was something they both understood, a common language that transcended their different worlds. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Mika spoke again. "Why did you help me? You could have left me there, many men would have." Yates met her eyes. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because you are a human being in need. Because I have seen too much death lately, and I was not about to let someone die when I had the power to prevent it. And maybe because I hope that somewhere, if the situations were reversed, someone would do the same for someone I cared about." Something shifted in Mika's expression, a wall beginning to crumble. "You are a good man, Yates Anderson. There are not many like you." "There are more than you might think," he said, "but I will not pretend there are enough. The world can be a cruel place." "Yes," she agreed softly, "it can be." The third day dawned clear and bright, the storm having finally exhausted itself. The world outside their shelter was transformed, covered in a blanket of white that sparkled in the sunlight. The temperature was still well below freezing, but without the wind and snow, travel was possible again. Yates and Mika emerged from their shelter, both relieved to see blue sky again. She was still weak, moving carefully, but her condition had improved dramatically from when he had first found her. The bruises on her face were turning from purple to yellow, beginning the long process of healing. "Where will you go?" Yates asked as they stood looking out at the snow-covered landscape. Mika was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know. The relatives I was traveling to meet are 2 days' ride south, but I do not know if I can make that journey alone, and the men who attacked us might still be in the area." "I am heading toward Las Vegas," Yates said. "It is northeast of here, maybe a day and a half's ride in this snow. You could come with me. We could find someone there who could help you get to your relatives safely, or you could decide what you want to do next without having to worry about freezing or starving in the meantime." She looked at him, doubt and hope warring in her expression. "A woman like me, traveling with a man like you. That will cause talk. It could cause trouble for you." "Let people talk," Yates said firmly. "I am not going to leave you out here alone when you are still recovering. If people have a problem with me helping someone who needs help, that says more about them than it does about me." A small smile touched Mika's lips, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face, bringing light to her dark eyes. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Yates Anderson." "Probably a bit of both," he admitted with a slight grin. "But my offer stands. You are welcome to travel with me. No expectations, no obligations, just one person helping another." Mika considered for another moment, then nodded. "I accept your offer. Thank you. Again." They prepared to leave, Yates packing up their camp while Mika helped as much as her still recovering strength would allow. He fashioned a place for her to ride behind him on Copper, knowing the horse could manage both their weights for the distance they needed to travel. Before they left, Mika walked to the back of the shelter where Yates had found her and knelt in the snow. He watched as she spoke quietly in Apache, words he could not understand but whose meaning was clear. She was saying goodbye to her fallen companions, acknowledging them, honoring them. When she rose and returned to him, there were tears on her cheeks, but her expression was resolute. "I am ready," she said. The journey to Las Vegas was slow and cold, but without the storm it was manageable. They rode in silence for the most part, conserving energy, though occasionally Yates would point out landmarks or Mika would comment on something she observed. Despite the difficult circumstances, Yates found himself increasingly aware of her presence behind him on the horse, the way she held onto him for balance, the sound of her breathing. He told himself it was simply because he was unused to traveling with someone, especially a woman. He told himself that the strange feeling in his chest whenever she spoke was just relief that she was alive and recovering. He told himself that the way he had started thinking about her smile had nothing to do with attraction, and everything to do with being glad to see someone healing from trauma. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. They stopped to rest and water the horse at a creek where the ice had been broken by deer seeking their own water. As Copper drank, Yates and Mika stood on the snowy bank, both wrapped in blankets against the cold. "Can I ask you something?" Mika said suddenly. "Of course. What will you do in Las Vegas? You said you were carrying supplies, but you have not mentioned what comes after." Yates was quiet for a moment. "Truth is, I do not really know. I have been drifting since my brother died. I had thought maybe I would find work on one of the ranches in the area, or maybe sign on with a freight company. I do not have much in the way of plans beyond getting through each day." "That sounds lonely," Mika observed. "It is," he admitted, "but I have not really known what else to do. After losing so much, it has been hard to think about building anything new. Seems like everything I care about gets taken away eventually." She reached out and touched his arm lightly, the gesture surprising him. "I understand that feeling. After my father died, and then as I watched my people struggle and suffer, I often felt the same way. Why build anything? Why care about anything? It will just be destroyed." But then I realized something. The men who attacked us, they wanted to destroy more than just our lives. They wanted to destroy our hope, our will to keep going. If I give up on everything, they win. So I decided to keep hoping, keep trying even when it hurts, even when it seems pointless. Her words struck something deep inside him. You are wiser than your years, Mika Hawthorne. I have had to be, she said simply. Survival demanded it. They reached Las Vegas the next afternoon, the small but growing town appearing on the horizon like a promise of warmth and civilization. Las Vegas had been established as a settlement in 1835 and had grown into a modest town serving ranchers, traders, and travelers passing through the New Mexico territory. It sat in a valley with a river running through it, positioned on the old Santa Fe Trail, which made it an important stopping point for commerce. As they rode down the main street, Yates felt Mika tense behind him. He understood why. The looks they were getting ranged from curious to hostile, people noting the Apache woman riding with a white cowboy. Some people just stared, others whispered to their companions, and a few looked outright angry. Yates ignored them all, riding straight to the boarding house he knew offered clean rooms and decent food. He helped Mika down from the horse, very aware of the eyes watching them, then led Copper to the hitching post. The proprietor of the boarding house, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Clara Jenkins, came out onto the porch as they approached. Her eyes took in the scene, and Yates could see her making calculations. "Afternoon, madam," Yates said politely, removing his hat. "I am looking for 2 rooms for a few nights. This is Miss Hawthorne. She was caught in the storm and I found her. She needs a place to recover while we figure out her next steps." Mrs. Jenkins looked from Yates to Mika and back again. Her expression was unreadable. Finally, she said, "I have 2 rooms available. They are small but clean. Meals are included. That will be $2 per room per night." It was higher than the usual rate, and they both knew it, but Yates just nodded. "That will be fine, thank you." "Rules are simple," Mrs. Jenkins continued. "No drinking, no fighting, no guests in the rooms after 9 o'clock. You break the rules, you are out. Are we clear?" "Perfectly clear, madam." She nodded and stepped aside to let them enter. "Rooms are upstairs, 2nd and 3rd doors on the left. I will bring up some hot water for washing. Supper is at 6. The room Yates took was exactly as described, small but clean, with a bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. He cleaned up as best he could with the hot water Mrs. Jenkins provided, shaved off his trail beard, and changed into the one clean shirt he had in his saddlebags. Looking at himself in the small mirror above the washstand, he barely recognized himself. The events of the past few days had left their mark, adding new lines around his eyes, making him look older than his 24 years. There was a soft knock on his door. When he opened it, he found Mika standing there, also cleaned up, her long black hair brushed and gleaming, wearing the same buckskin dress but having managed to clean and repair it somewhat. She looked beautiful, and Yates had to remind himself to breathe. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said. "Without all the distraction of survival, you saved my life, Yates. I owe you everything." "You do not owe me anything," he said firmly. "I did what anyone should have done." "But not what anyone would have done," she countered. "Most men would have left me there. Some would have done worse. You chose to help, even though it cost you supplies and time, and now is bringing you judgment from your own people. That means something." They stood there in the doorway, looking at each other, and Yates felt something shift between them. It was a moment heavy with possibility, with words unspoken but felt nonetheless. "I should prepare for supper," Mika said finally, breaking the spell. "But I wanted you to know. What you did matters. You matter." She turned and went back to her room before he could respond, leaving him standing in his doorway, his heart beating harder than it had any right to. Supper that evening was tense. Mrs. Jenkins served a simple but filling meal of stew and bread, and there were 4 other guests at the boarding house, all men. 2 were cowboys passing through, 1 was a merchant, and the last was a gambler based on his fancy clothes and card-worn hands. All of them stared at Mika with varying degrees of curiosity and hostility. One of the cowboys, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, finally spoke up. "Seems odd. A white man traveling with an Apache squaw makes a person wonder what the arrangement is." The insult in his tone was clear, and Yates felt anger flash through him. He set down his spoon carefully and met the man's eyes. "Miss Hawthorne is a fellow traveler who needed assistance. I provided it. Our arrangement, as you call it, is none of your business." "I am just saying it looks suspicious. Everyone knows you cannot trust an Apache. They are all savages." "That is enough," Yates said, his voice hard. "You will not speak about Miss Hawthorne that way in my presence. She has done nothing to you and deserves your respect." The cowboy sneered. "Or what? You going to fight me over some Indian girl, if I have to?" The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. The other diners watched with interest, and Mrs. Jenkins looked like she was about to intervene. But before the situation could escalate further, Mika spoke. "Please," she said quietly. "I do not want to cause trouble. I will eat in my room." "You will do no such thing," Yates said firmly, not taking his eyes off the cowboy. "You have as much right to eat at this table as anyone else here. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me outside." The cowboy looked like he was considering it, but his companion put a hand on his arm. "Leave it alone, Buck. It is not worth it." Buck shook off his friend's hand but settled back in his chair, though the hostility did not leave his face. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence, with Yates very aware of the currents of animosity flowing around the table. After supper, Mika excused herself to her room, and Yates took the opportunity to go check on Copper at the stable. He needed the fresh air and the time to cool down. The confrontation at dinner had reminded him forcefully of the world they were living in, where the color of a person's skin or their heritage could inspire such immediate hatred. He was brushing down Copper when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find the merchant from dinner, a thin man with graying hair and kind eyes. "I wanted to apologize for Buck's behavior," the merchant said. "Not all of us feel that way. What you did, helping that young woman, that took courage, decency too. Those are qualities in short supply these days." "I appreciate that," Yates said, "but I did not do it for praise. I did it because it needed doing. I know. That is what makes it admirable." The merchant extended his hand. "Name is George Patterson. I run a general store up in Santa Fe, but I am down here looking at possibly opening a second location." Yates shook his hand. "Yates Anderson. I am just passing through trying to figure out my next move. If you are looking for work, I might know of some opportunities." "Man I know runs a freight business between here and Santa Fe. Always looking for reliable workers. The work is hard, but it pays decent, and he is a fair man." "I will keep that in mind. Thank you." Patterson nodded. "Also, word of advice, watch your back while you are in town. Buck has friends, and they are the type to hold grudges. You embarrassed him tonight, and men like that do not forget." After Patterson left, Yates finished with Copper and headed back to the boarding house. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the dark sky. As he walked, he found himself thinking about Mika, about her strength in the face of everything she had endured, about the way she had defended herself with dignity at dinner, even when faced with hatred. He realized he was falling for her. The knowledge should have scared him, should have made him want to put distance between them. Their worlds were so different, the obstacles so numerous. But instead of fear, he felt something else. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of it. When he reached the boarding house, he found Mika sitting on the front porch despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket and looking up at the stars. "Could not sleep?" he asked, joining her. "Too much on my mind," she admitted. "I am sorry about dinner. I did not mean to cause trouble for you." "You did not cause anything. That was all on Buck and his ignorance. You have nothing to apologize for." She looked at him, her face silvered by moonlight. "You stood up for me. No one has done that in a long time, not since my father died." "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was. He loved my mother deeply, even though loving her meant leaving his own people behind. He used to tell me that love does not care about the color of a person's skin or where they came from. He said love is the one thing that can bridge any divide, if people are brave enough to let it." Yates felt his heart hammering in his chest. "He sounds very wise." "He was." She paused, then added softly, "I think he would have liked you." They sat together in comfortable silence, shoulders nearly touching, both looking up at the infinite stars. And in that moment, Yates felt something settle inside him, a sense of rightness that he had not experienced in a long time. The next few days passed in a strange sort of limbo. Yates made inquiries about work and about how Mika might safely travel to her relatives. Mika slowly regained her full strength, the last effects of her ordeal in the cold fading away. And despite their best efforts to maintain a respectful distance, they found themselves drawn to each other more and more. They took meals together, ignoring the stares and whispers. They took walks around the town, Yates showing Mika the various establishments and Mika sharing stories of her childhood, of her mother's people and her father's efforts to bridge two worlds. They talked for hours, discovering shared views on everything from the beauty of the New Mexico landscape to the injustices they had both witnessed. One afternoon, about a week after their arrival in Las Vegas, they rode out to a spot Yates had discovered near the river. The snow was beginning to melt, creating a sound of running water that was musical in its constancy. They dismounted and walked along the bank, Copper following behind like a loyal dog. "I spoke to a man today who runs a freight company," Yates said. "He offered me a job, good pay, regular work. It would be based here in Las Vegas." "That is good news," Mika said, though something in her voice suggested it was not entirely good. "You deserve stability, a chance to build something. I also spoke to someone who knows the area where your relatives are located. He says he could guide you there safely if you wanted. He is Apache himself, married to a Mexican woman, trusted in both communities. You would be safe with him." Mika stopped walking and turned to face him. "So this is goodbye then? You take your job, I go to my relatives, and we go back to our separate lives." "That would be the sensible thing," Yates agreed, also stopping. "The practical thing. We come from different worlds, Mika. Even in a place as rough as Las Vegas, you have seen how people react to us being together. It would only get worse if we tried to make something of this." "Make something of what?" she asked quietly, but her eyes held a challenge. Yates took a breath, knowing he was about to step off a cliff. "Of what I feel for you. Of what I hope you might feel for me. I know it is crazy. I know we have only known each other a short time. But in that time, you have become important to me. More than important. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wondering what you are doing, wanting to make you smile, feeling protective and proud and terrified all at once. I think I am falling in love with you, Mika. And I know that is probably the most foolish thing I could say, but I cannot keep pretending otherwise." Mika's eyes had gone wide as he spoke, but he could not read her expression. The silence after his confession stretched out, each second feeling like an hour. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You remember in the cave when I first woke up, I was so afraid. Afraid of where I was, afraid of what might happen to me, afraid that I had survived the cold only to face something worse. But then you spoke to me with such kindness, treated me with such respect, and something in me knew I was safe. As I recovered, as I watched you care for me without asking for anything in return, something changed inside me." She stepped closer to him. "When I said you were a good man, I meant it, but it is more than that now. You have shown me that there is still goodness in the world, that not all hope is lost. You have made me feel things I thought I would never feel again. You have made me want to live fully, not just survive. So when you say you are falling in love with me, Yates Anderson, I need you to know something." She reached up and placed her hand over his heart, feeling it beat rapidly beneath her palm. "I am already in love with you. I have been since that night in the cave when you could have done anything but chose to simply keep me warm and safe. When I whispered that I was yours, I meant it in ways I did not fully understand then. But I understand now. My heart is yours if you want it. Despite all the obstacles, despite all the reasons this should not work, I am yours." Yates felt like the world had stopped spinning. He covered her hand with his own, holding it against his chest. "I want it. I want you. I want everything, even though I know it will be hard. Especially because I know it will be hard. You are worth fighting for, Mika. What we have is worth fighting for." She smiled then, that beautiful smile that transformed her whole face, and rose up on her toes to kiss him. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and shared futures. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard, both had tears in their eyes. "So what do we do?" Mika asked. "How do we make this work?" "We take it one day at a time," Yates said. "I will take that job with the freight company. You can decide if you want to stay here or if you want to go to your relatives. Either way, we will figure it out together. I am not letting you go now that I have found you." "I will stay," Mika said without hesitation. "My relatives are safe and well, but my future is here with you." They stood by the river as the sun began to set, holding each other close, knowing that the path ahead would not be easy but determined to walk it together. In the distance, Las Vegas waited, full of judgment and opportunity in equal measure. But in that moment, with Mika in his arms, Yates felt like he could face anything. The decision to build a life together was one thing. The reality of it proved far more complicated. Yates took the job with the freight company, working long days hauling supplies between Las Vegas and other settlements in the territory. Mika found work doing laundry and mending for Mrs. Jenkins, who despite her initial wariness had warmed to the young woman after seeing her work ethic and gentle nature. But living arrangements proved problematic. As an unmarried couple, they could not share a room without causing a scandal that would cost them both their jobs and their reputations, such as those were. They maintained separate rooms at the boarding house, which meant spending money they could ill afford and maintaining a distance that grew more painful by the day. 3 weeks after their confession by the river, Yates made a decision. He went to speak with Father Miguel at the small Catholic church that served Las Vegas's mixed population of Hispanics, whites, and a few converted Native Americans. The priest was a round man with kind eyes who listened carefully as Yates explained the situation. "You want to marry this woman?" Father Miguel asked when Yates had finished. "More than anything. But I know it is not that simple. She is Apache, I am white. Some people will never accept it. I need to know if you would be willing to perform the ceremony, and what I need to do to make it right in the eyes of the church and the law." Father Miguel was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. You know I have spent 30 years serving this community, trying to bridge the many divides that separate people. Spanish and Anglo, rich and poor, settler and native. I have seen much hatred, but I have also seen much love. And I have learned that love, true love built on respect and commitment, is rare enough that it should be celebrated, not condemned. He leaned forward. That being said, you should understand what you are undertaking. Marrying a native woman will limit your opportunities. Some businesses will not hire you. Some establishments will not serve you. Your children, if you have them, will face prejudice from all sides. Are you prepared for that? I am, Yates said firmly. I would rather have a difficult life with Mika than an easy one without her. And what of her people? Have you considered that she may face rejection from the Apache for marrying a white man? We have talked about it. Her father faced similar issues when he married her mother, but he always said that love was worth the cost. Mika believes the same thing. So do I. Father Miguel smiled. Then I will marry you with my blessing. Bring Miss Hawthorne to meet with me so I can ensure she enters this union freely and understands what she is committing to. If she is as determined as you are, we will set a date for the wedding. Yates left the church feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He went straight to the boarding house, where he found Mika hanging laundry in the yard behind the building. She looked up as he approached, and her face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. You look like you have good news, she observed, setting down the wet shirt she had been about to hang. I spoke to Father Miguel, he said, taking her hands in his. He is willing to marry us. I know we have not talked about the timing, and I know this is fast, but Mika, I do not want to wait any longer. I want to build a life with you properly as husband and wife. Will you marry me? Tears sprang to her eyes, but she was smiling. Yes. Yes, I will marry you, Yates Anderson. Whenever you want, wherever you want, however you want. Just yes. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling her heart beat against his. Around them, laundry flapped in the breeze, the ordinary world continuing on while their own world transformed into something extraordinary. They were married 2 weeks later on a cool spring morning in late April 1877. The ceremony was small, attended by Mrs. Jenkins, George Patterson, the merchant who had befriended them, a few of Yates's co-workers from the freight company, and surprisingly, the guide who had offered to take Mika to her relatives. He had returned to Las Vegas on other business, and attended the wedding as a representative of Mika's mother's people, a gesture that touched both bride and groom deeply. Mika wore a dress that Mrs. Jenkins had helped her make, simple but beautiful, white cotton with blue trim. She had woven wildflowers into her hair, creating a crown of color. Yates wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed, his hair neatly trimmed, looking more nervous than Mika had ever seen him. Father Miguel performed the ceremony in both Spanish and English, blessing their union and speaking eloquently about love that crosses boundaries and builds bridges. When Yates and Mika exchanged their vows, there was not a dry eye in the church, even among the rough cowboys who worked with Yates. Do you, Yates Anderson, take Mika Hawthorne to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Yates said, his voice steady and sure, his eyes locked on Mika's face. And do you, Mika Hawthorne, take Yates Anderson to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Mika said, her voice clear and strong. Then by the power vested in me by God and the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Yates cupped Mika's face gently in his hands and kissed her softly, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The small congregation erupted in applause, and for that moment in that place, the divisions of the outside world did not matter. There was only love and hope and new beginnings. Mrs. Jenkins hosted a small reception at the boarding house, putting out a modest spread of food and allowing the newlyweds to use her parlor for celebrating. It was not fancy, but it was heartfelt, filled with genuine good wishes and hope for their future. "You will stay in the large room at the end of the hall," Mrs. Jenkins told them privately. "I am giving it to you at the standard rate as my wedding gift. You need more space as a married couple, and that room has a nice window that catches the morning sun." "That is very generous of you," Mika said, clearly moved. "You have been so kind to us." "You are good people," Mrs. Jenkins said simply. "Both of you, you work hard, you treat others with respect, and you clearly love each other. That is all that should matter, though I know the world does not always see it that way. But in my house, you are welcome and valued." Later that evening, when the guests had departed and they were finally alone in their room, Yates and Mika stood together by the window, looking out at the stars that had witnessed so much of their journey together. "Are you happy?" Yates asked softly, his arms wrapped around his wife from behind. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Mika replied, leaning back against his chest. "When I was freezing in that cave, I never imagined this. A home, a husband, a future. You gave me all of that, Yates. You gave me back my life and then made it worth living." "You did the same for me," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was just drifting before I found you. You gave me purpose, gave me something to work for, to dream about. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Mika Anderson." She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining. "Mika Anderson, I like the sound of that." "So do I," he said, and kissed her, deep and slow. A kiss that led to other kisses, to whispered words and tender touches, to the consummation of their marriage and the true beginning of their life together. The first year of their marriage was not easy. True to Father Miguel's warnings, they faced prejudice and hostility from many quarters. Some businesses refused to serve them. Some people crossed the street rather than walk past them. Yates lost a few acquaintances who could not accept his choice of wife, and Mika faced cruel comments and worse from those who saw her as nothing more than a savage in white woman's clothing. But they also found unexpected allies and built a community of their own. George Patterson became a trusted friend, often stopping by to visit when he was in town. Father Miguel checked on them regularly, offering spiritual guidance and practical help. Several of Yates's co-workers proved to be good men who judged by character rather than color, and they and their families became part of Yates and Mika's social circle. Mrs. Jenkins remained a steadfast supporter, defending them fiercely to anyone who dared speak ill of them in her presence. "They are the best tenants I have ever had," she would say sharply. "Always pay on time, keep their rooms spotless, and treat everyone with courtesy. If you have a problem with them, you have a problem with me." Yates continued working for the freight company, proving himself reliable and capable. He was often gone for several days at a time on long hauls, which was hard on both of them, but the pay was good and steady. Mika expanded her work beyond laundry, learning to make the beautiful beadwork of her mother's people, and selling her creations to a shop in town that catered to tourists and travelers. Her work was exquisite, and she began to develop a reputation that brought customers seeking her out specifically. That first winter together, they saved every penny they could, dreaming of the day when they could afford their own place. They would lie in bed in the early mornings before work, talking about the house they would build, the land they would own, the life they would create. "I want a big kitchen," Mika would say, "with a window over the sink so I can look out while I work. And a barn for horses," Yates would add. Good horses, strong and fast. Maybe we could breed them, sell them. And a garden. A big garden where I can grow vegetables and herbs like my mother taught me. And a porch where we can sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. And rooms for children, Mika would say softly, when we are ready, when the time is right. Yes, Yates would agree, pulling her closer. Rooms for children. It was in the spring of 1878, more than a year after they had married, that Mika discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, her body changing in subtle ways she recognized, but she waited to be sure before telling Yates. When she finally shared the news, he reacted with such pure joy that it brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand resting reverently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Mika, you have made me the happiest man alive. You are not worried?" She asked, needing to voice her own fears. "About raising a child who will be both Apache and white, about the world they will face. I am terrified," he admitted honestly, "but I am also filled with hope. Our child will be raised with love, taught to be strong and kind and proud of all parts of their heritage. They will face challenges, yes, but they will also have parents who will fight for them and protect them and teach them that they are valuable and worthy, no matter what anyone else says." Mika nodded, reassured by his words and his confidence. "We will be good parents." "The best we can be," he agreed. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Mika continuing to work until her growing belly made it difficult to lean over the laundry tubs. She focused more on her beadwork, which she could do while sitting comfortably. Yates became increasingly protective, worrying about her constantly when he was away on freight runs. His boss, seeing the situation, began assigning him shorter routes that would keep him closer to home. They finally saved enough money to begin looking for land. With help from George Patterson, who had become like family to them, they found a small plot just outside Las Vegas, 5 acres with a creek running through it and a view of the mountains in the distance. It was not much, but it was theirs, purchased legally with money they had earned through hard work and sacrifice. Yates began building their house with his own hands, working every spare moment, with friends coming to help when they could. It was a simple structure, just 2 rooms to start with plans to add more later, but it was solid and well built. He made sure to include everything they had dreamed about: the big window in the kitchen area, a sturdy porch, and space marked out for Mika's garden. They moved into their unfinished house in late October 1878, just a month before Mika's due date. It lacked furniture and finishing touches, but it had walls and a roof and a fireplace that Yates had built with special care, knowing how important warmth would be with a new baby. On a cold December night, with snow falling gently outside, Mika went into labor. Yates rode frantically to fetch Mrs. Jenkins, who had assisted with many births, and a midwife named Sarah who served the community. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, and Yates spent every moment terrified that something would go wrong, that he would lose the 2 people who had become his entire world. But Mika was strong, drawing on the resilience that had carried her through so many trials. At sunset, on December 8, 1878, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the midwife placed the squalling infant in Yates's arms, he stared down at the tiny face in wonder, seeing features that were a perfect blend of both parents, a beautiful testament to their love. "He is perfect," Yates breathed, carefully bringing the baby to Mika, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "You are amazing. He is amazing. I love you both so much." Mika smiled tiredly, reaching up to touch her son's downy black hair. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly during the pregnancy, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their child, Yates knew exactly what felt right. "I was thinking, if you approve, we could name him Thomas after your father. A man who had the courage to cross boundaries for love, just like we did." Tears slipped down Mika's cheeks. "Thomas. Yes, Thomas Anderson. My father would have been so proud." They called him Tommy, and he became the center of their world. Despite the fears they had harbored, most of their community accepted the baby readily. Even people who had been skeptical of Yates and Mika's marriage found it hard to resist the charm of a smiling infant. Tommy became a bridge, opening hearts that had been closed and creating connections that had not existed before. The years that followed were full and rich. Yates continued working freight, but also began breeding horses on their land, as he had dreamed. Mika's beadwork business grew, with orders coming from as far away as Santa Fe and even Albuquerque. They slowly expanded their house, adding 2 more rooms and improving the barn. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's quick smile. They taught him to speak both English and Apache, wanting him to know both sides of his heritage. They taught him to ride horses, to work hard, to treat all people with respect regardless of who they were or where they came from. They taught him that his mixed heritage was not something to be ashamed of, but something to be proud of, a symbol of love overcoming division. In 1881, when Tommy was 2, Mika gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Ruth, named after the midwife who had delivered Tommy and Yates's mother respectively. The twins were identical, with their mother's beautiful features and their father's lighter coloring, and they brought even more joy and chaos into the household. In 1883, another son arrived whom they named Michael. And in 1886, their family was completed with the birth of their youngest child, a daughter they named Clara after Mrs. Jenkins, who had been such a constant support throughout their marriage. Raising 5 children on a small homestead in the New Mexico territory was demanding work, but Yates and Mika thrived on it. Their home was always full of laughter, sometimes full of tears, always full of love. They faced challenges, certainly. Money was often tight, the weather could be brutal. And prejudice, while diminished, never entirely disappeared. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from their love and their partnership. On difficult days, they would remind each other of how they met, of the blizzard and the cave and the moment when death had been so close, but life had won. They would remember Mika's whispered words, "I am yours," and how those words had been a promise that they had kept and would keep for the rest of their lives. Their children grew up surrounded by a diverse community that included people of many backgrounds. Hispanic neighbors who taught them Spanish songs and shared recipes. Apache relatives that Mika had finally reconnected with who taught them traditional stories and skills. White families who did not care about skin color and judged only by character. The Anderson children learned that family was not just about blood but about love, loyalty, and mutual respect. Tommy, as the eldest, became a natural leader, protective of his younger siblings but also gentle and thoughtful. He inherited his mother's artistic ability and his father's strength. And as he grew into a young man, he spoke often of wanting to be a bridge between communities, just as his parents had been. The twins, Sarah and Ruth, were inseparable and mischievous, keeping their parents constantly on their toes but also bringing endless entertainment and joy. They were fearless, riding horses almost before they could walk, climbing trees, and refusing to be limited by anyone's expectations of what girls should or should not do. Michael was the quiet one, a thinker who loved books and learning, spending hours listening to Father Miguel's stories and teaching himself to read at a young age. And little Clara was the baby, adored by everyone, with a sweet disposition that could melt the hardest heart. As the years passed, Yates and Mika watched their children grow with pride and wonder, hardly believing sometimes that this beautiful, complicated, loving family had grown from that desperate moment in a cave during a blizzard. They had built something lasting, something meaningful, something that would extend far beyond their own lives. In 1890, when Yates was 37 and Mika was 35, they celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary. The children, now ranging from 12-year-old Tommy down to 4-year-old Clara, helped prepare a special dinner. As they sat around their table in the house that Yates had built with his own hands, surrounded by the family they had created, both parents felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after the children were in bed, Yates and Mika sat on their porch as they so often did, wrapped in blankets against the cool spring air, watching the stars that had witnessed their journey. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked softly. "Choosing this life, choosing me?" "I know it has not always been easy." Mika turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight, her face showing the lines that life and laughter had carved there. "Not for a single moment. Every challenge we have faced has been worth it." "You saved my life that night in the cave, Yates, but you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live, a future to hope for, a love that has sustained me through everything. Our children are proof that love can overcome any obstacle, that two people from different worlds can come together and create something beautiful. I am proud of what we have built. I am proud to be your wife. I am proud of our family." "I am proud of us too," Yates said, pulling her closer. "Every morning I wake up next to you, I remember how lucky I am. You are the strongest, most beautiful, most amazing person I have ever known. You took the fragments of two lives and wove them into something whole. You are my heart, Mika." "And you are mine," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "My rescuer, my husband, my home." They sat in comfortable silence as they had so many times over the years, drawing comfort and strength from each other's presence. Inside the house, their children slept safely, the future stretching out before them full of possibility. The challenges would continue, certainly, but so would the love, passing down through generations, a legacy of courage and hope. Years continued to pass, each bringing its own joys and sorrows. They celebrated as Tommy met and fell in love with a young woman from a nearby ranch, a spirited girl with red hair and a kind heart who loved him for exactly who he was. They attended his wedding in 1895, watching with misty eyes as their eldest son promised to love and cherish his bride, echoing the vows they themselves had spoken so many years before. The twins proved just as headstrong in young adulthood as they had been as children. Sarah became a teacher, determined to educate children regardless of their background, while Ruth developed a passion for horses that rivaled her father's, working alongside him in the breeding business and proving to have an almost magical ability to train even the most difficult animals. Michael, true to his scholarly nature, eventually went east to study, earning a place at a university in Boston where he studied law, determined to use his education to fight for justice for Native peoples and other marginalized communities. His parents worried about him being so far from home, but were immensely proud of his determination and purpose. And Clara, their youngest, grew into a beautiful young woman who inherited her mother's talent for beadwork and her father's business sense, eventually opening a shop in Las Vegas that sold native crafts and helped support other Apache artisans. Through it all, Yates and Mika remained each other's anchors, their love deepening and strengthening with each passing year. They faced loss together, mourning when Father Miguel passed in 1893 and Mrs. Jenkins in 1896, both having been such important parts of their lives and their story. They faced joy together, celebrating the birth of their first grandchild in 1896, a baby boy that Tommy and his wife named Yates Jr., ensuring that the family name would continue. As the century drew to a close, Yates and Mika found themselves in their 40s, no longer young but far from old, looking back on a life well lived and forward to more years together. Their home had become a gathering place for an extended family that included people of many backgrounds, all united by bonds of love and respect, rather than just blood. On a warm evening in June 1899, as they celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors, Yates pulled Mika aside for a private moment on their porch, the same porch where they had spent countless evenings over the years. "I want to thank you," he said, taking both her hands in his, "for saying yes that night in the cave when I offered to help you, for trusting me when you had no reason to, for agreeing to marry me when it would have been easier to walk away, for building this life with me, for giving me these beautiful children, for being my partner in everything. You are the bravest, most remarkable person I have ever known, and I fall more in love with you with each passing day." Mika smiled, that radiant smile that still had the power to make his heart skip. "Do you remember what I said to you in the cave when I first woke up and you were keeping me warm by the fire? You said thank you," Yates recalled. "Yes, but before that, when I was barely conscious, when I was still more in the spirit world than in this one, I looked at you and I knew somehow that you were important, that you were mine. So I whispered, 'I am yours,' you remember." Yates thought back to those long hours in the cave, watching over her, hoping she would survive. He had thought several times that he heard her speak, too quietly to make out the words. "I remember hearing something, but I could not understand it. I said, 'I am yours.' Even then, when I was barely alive, some part of me recognized you, knew that you were the one I was meant to find, meant to love, meant to build a life with. And I have been yours every day since, just as you have been mine. That will never change, Yates, not in this life or the next. I am yours always." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, feeling the beating of her heart against his chest. Around them, the sounds of their anniversary celebration continued, their children's laughter, their grandchildren's squeals of delight, the warm conversations of friends. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, as it had been in the cave during that blizzard so many years ago, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. "And I am yours," he whispered into her hair. "Always and forever I am yours." As the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Yates and Mika stood together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had created, the love they had nurtured, and the future they had made possible. They had started with nothing but each other, a cowboy and an Apache woman brought together by chance and choice, and they had built something that would endure long after they were gone. Their story was not one of easy triumph or simple happiness. It was a story of persistence, of choosing love even when the world made it difficult, of building bridges across divides that others said could not be crossed. It was a story of two people who recognized in each other something precious and worth fighting for, and who spent their lives honoring that recognition. And it was a story that would be told by their children and grandchildren for generations to come. A reminder that love, real love, the kind that transforms and endures, knows no boundaries of race or culture or background. It only requires courage, commitment, and two people willing to look past the surface and see the soul beneath. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the sky above, Yates and Meeker returned to their celebration, to their family, to the beautiful, complicated, wonderful life they had built together. The blizzard that had brought them together was long past, but the warmth they had created in its wake would burn bright for decades to come, a beacon of hope and possibility in a world that desperately needed both. The new century arrived with both promise and uncertainty, but the Anderson family faced it as they had faced everything else together. Yates and Mika, now in their late 40s, had become respected elders in their community, their story well known and often cited as an example of what was possible when people chose love over hate, understanding over prejudice. Their home continued to serve as a gathering place, not just for family but for the community at large. People of all backgrounds would stop by, knowing they would find a warm welcome, good food, and wise counsel. Mika became known as someone people could come to for advice, healing herbs, and a sympathetic ear. Yates was respected for his fairness in business dealings and his willingness to help neighbors in need. In 1903, a significant moment arrived when the territorial governor visited Las Vegas and requested a meeting with Yates and Mika. He had heard their story and wanted to recognize them for their contributions to building bridges between communities. At a public ceremony, he praised them for their courage and their example, presenting them with a commendation that both felt honored to receive but slightly embarrassed by. "We just lived our lives the best way we knew how," Mika said quietly when called upon to speak. "We loved each other, raised our children, treated our neighbors with respect. That should not be exceptional, but if our story can help others see that love is more powerful than hate, that understanding is more productive than prejudice, then perhaps our struggles have served a larger purpose." Her words were met with applause from most of the audience, though a few still grumbled about giving recognition to a mixed-race couple. But their voices were fewer now, drowned out by the growing chorus of those who had come to accept and even admire what Yates and Meeker represented. As their children grew into full adulthood and started families of their own, Yates and Mika found themselves with more time to spend together, to travel a bit, to enjoy the fruits of their decades of hard work. They took a trip to Santa Fe, where Michael was now practicing law, and marveled at how much the city had grown. They visited Apache relatives in the mountains, where Mika was welcomed as an elder who had walked in both worlds and maintained her dignity and her heritage. They even traveled to the East Coast once, taking a train to Boston to visit Michael and see the university where he taught classes on Native American law. For Mika especially, seeing the ocean for the first time was a profound experience, standing on the shore and looking out at the endless water, marveling at the vastness of the world. But they always returned home to their small ranch outside Las Vegas, to the house Yates had built with his own hands, to the land they had worked so hard to acquire and keep. It was where they belonged, where their roots had grown deep, where their love story had unfolded in all its complexity and beauty. In 1907, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with an enormous gathering that brought together people from all corners of their life. Tommy and his wife brought their 4 children. The twins came, Sarah with her schoolteacher husband and 2 daughters, Ruth with her cowboy husband and 3 sons. Michael came from Boston with his new wife, a fellow lawyer he had met through his work. Clara came with her fiancé, a young man who worked in her shop and shared her passion for promoting native art. There were also dozens of friends, neighbors, business associates, and community members, all wanting to honor the couple who had become such an important part of the fabric of Las Vegas and the surrounding area. Father Miguel's successor, Father Jose, said a blessing over the couple and their marriage, thanking God for their example and their love. As Yates and Mika stood before the assembled crowd, their hands clasped, their faces bearing the lines and marks of a life fully lived, they looked at each other with the same love and devotion they had felt at the beginning. Perhaps deeper now, enriched by shared experiences, tested and strengthened by challenges overcome together. 30 years, Yates said, addressing the crowd but speaking primarily to his wife. 30 years ago, I married the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. She has made me a better man than I ever could have been without her. She has given me a family I treasure, a home I love, and a purpose I am proud of. Every day with her has been a gift, even the hard days, because we faced them together. I look forward to 30 more years and then 30 more after that, because I cannot imagine my life without her in it. Mika squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with tears. 30 years ago, I married a man who saved my life in more ways than one. He not only pulled me from the snow and warmed me by his fire, but he gave me a reason to keep living, to keep hoping, to believe that goodness still existed in the world. He has been my partner, my protector, my best friend, and my greatest love. Our life together has been everything I could have hoped for and so much more. I am yours, Yates Anderson, as I have been since that night in the cave, as I will be until my last breath. There was not a dry eye in the gathering as they kissed, sealing their recommitment to each other with the same tenderness they had shown at their original wedding 3 decades earlier. The celebration that followed was joyous, full of music and dancing, food and laughter, stories shared and memories made. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Yates and Mika found themselves once again on their porch, their favorite spot, looking up at the stars. They were joined this time by their 5 children and their spouses, and the growing number of grandchildren, all gathered around. "Tell us the story," young Yates Jr. asked, as he had asked so many times before. "Tell us how Grandpa found Grandma in the snow." Yates and Mika exchanged a smile. They had told this story countless times, but it never got old. It was their story, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. So they told it again, taking turns, filling in details, sharing the fear and uncertainty and eventual hope of those long-ago days. They told of the blizzard, the cave, the slow process of warming and healing. They told of the journey to Las Vegas, the decision to marry, the challenges they had faced and the joys they had found. The children and grandchildren listened raptly, even though they had heard it all before, because this was not just a story. It was their history, their legacy, the proof that love could overcome any obstacle if people were brave enough to fight for it. "And when I first woke up in that cave," Mika said, coming to the part of the story that had become most famous, "I was confused and afraid. But then I looked at your grandfather, and even though I did not know him, even though I had no reason to trust him, something in me knew I was safe. So I whispered the words that came from my heart, 'I am yours.' And she has been mine ever since," Yates finished, his arm around his wife, "and I have been hers. That is the secret, children. When you find the person who is yours, you hold on to them, you fight for them, you build a life with them. And you never, ever take them for granted." The grandchildren, especially the older ones, nodded solemnly, taking in the wisdom. The younger ones were already getting sleepy, leaning against their parents, content in the safety and love that surrounded them. As the family slowly dispersed to their various sleeping arrangements, some in the house, some in the barn converted for guests, some in bedrolls under the stars, Yates and Mika remained on the porch. It was their tradition, their time, the way they ended every important day. 30 years, Mika mused. It has gone so quickly and yet feels like forever at the same time. Do you remember what we dreamed about that first year we were married? The things we wanted to build, I remember. A house with a big kitchen window, a barn for horses, a garden, a porch for watching sunsets, rooms for children. We did it all, Yates said with satisfaction. Every single thing we dreamed about we made real. We did more than that, Mika corrected gently. We built not just a house but a home, not just a family but a legacy. We proved that love is stronger than hate, that bridges can be built, that two people from different worlds can create something beautiful together. That is worth more than any material thing we could have accumulated. Yates pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the comfortable fit of her body against his. You are the wisest person I know. I learned from the best, she said, tilting her face up to kiss him. From a cowboy brave enough to save an Apache woman in a snowstorm, and kind enough to love her for the rest of his life. They sat together as the night deepened, as they had sat together thousands of times before, drawing comfort and strength from each other's presence. Around them, their family slept safely, the fruit of their love and their labor. Above them, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning and now witnessed their thriving. The years that followed continued to be full and rich. Yates and Mika aged gracefully, their hair turning gray and then white, their movements slower but their minds sharp and their love undiminished. They became great-grandparents multiple times over, their family tree spreading and branching in beautiful complexity. In 1915, as World War began raging in Europe and talk of America's potential involvement dominated conversations, Yates and Mika gathered their family for what they sensed might be one of their last large gatherings. Yates's health had been declining, his heart not as strong as it once was, though his spirit remained undaunted. I want you all to remember something, he said to the assembled crowd of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Your grandmother and I came from different worlds. The world said we should not be together, that our love was wrong or impossible or impractical. But we chose each other anyway, and look what came from that choice. All of you. This beautiful, diverse, loving family. You carry in your veins the blood of both our peoples, and that is not a burden. It is a gift. You are bridges between worlds just by existing. Never forget that. Never be ashamed of who you are. Mika took over, her voice still strong despite her years. Your grandfather saved my life in that blizzard, but more importantly, he taught me that love is the most powerful force in the world. It can overcome hatred, prejudice, and fear. It can build something beautiful from nothing. It can sustain you through the darkest times and magnify the brightest joys. Love each other. Support each other. And when you find the person who is yours, hold on to them. Life is too short and too precious to waste on anything less than love. There were tears throughout the gathering, everyone sensing the weight of the moment, the importance of these words from the patriarch and matriarch of their family. And they took those words to heart, letting them shape how they lived their lives, how they treated others, how they faced the challenges that would come in the turbulent century ahead. Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cool October night in 1916, at the age of 63. He died in the house he had built, in the bed he had shared with his beloved wife for nearly 40 years, surrounded by love and legacy. His last words, whispered to Mika as she held his hand, were simple but profound. Thank you for everything. I love you. I am yours always. Mika grieved deeply, but not bitterly. She had been blessed with 4 decades with the love of her life, and she knew that what they had built together would endure long after both of them were gone. She lived for 7 more years, remaining active and engaged with her family and community, continuing to be a source of wisdom and strength for all who knew her. She spent her final years in the house that held so many memories, surrounded by children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone. She continued her beadwork almost until the end, her fingers maintaining their skill even as her body weakened. And every evening, she would sit on the porch where she and Yates had spent so many hours together, looking up at the stars, feeling his presence beside her. On a warm spring evening in 1923, at the age of 68, Mika died as Yates had peacefully in her sleep in their bed in their home. Her last conscious thought was of the cowboy who had found her in the snow, who had warmed her by his fire, who had spent his life loving her completely and without reservation. They were buried together in the small cemetery outside Las Vegas, under a simple headstone that read, Yates Anderson, 1853–1916, Mika Hawthorne Anderson, 1855–1923, together in life, together in eternity, I am yours. Their funeral brought together one of the largest gatherings Las Vegas had ever seen, people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects. The minister spoke of their love as an example to all, of how they had built bridges between communities, of the legacy they left in their children and grandchildren. But perhaps the most moving moment came when Tommy, their eldest son, now himself a grandfather, spoke about his parents. He told the story one more time, the story of the blizzard and the cave, the cowboy and the Apache woman. He told of their courage, their love, their unwavering commitment to each other and to their family. He told of the words his mother had whispered in that cave, barely conscious but already knowing what her heart held. I am yours. My parents taught us that love knows no boundaries, Tommy said, his voice strong despite his tears. They showed us that two people from completely different backgrounds could come together and create something beautiful. They proved that what matters is not where you come from, but how you treat others, how you love, how you live. They gave us a gift beyond measure, not just life, but an example of how to live with dignity, courage, and compassion. They were, quite simply, the best people I have ever known. And their love story will live on in every generation of this family, a reminder that love always wins if you are brave enough to fight for it. And so it did. The Anderson family grew and spread, carrying with them the story of Yates and Mika, the cowboy who found an Apache woman freezing in the snow and chose to save her, the woman who whispered, I am yours, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Their descendants married people of all backgrounds, continuing the tradition of building bridges between communities. They became teachers and lawyers, ranchers and artists, doctors and activists, all carrying forward the values their remarkable ancestors had instilled. The house that Yates built remained in the family for generations, becoming a beloved gathering place where the story was told and retold, each generation adding their own memories to its walls. The porch where Yates and Mika had spent countless evenings became a sacred space, where family members would sit and look at the stars and remember the love that had started it all. In the years that followed, as the West changed and grew, as Las Vegas transformed from a small frontier town into something larger and more complex, the story of Yates and Mika became part of local legend. It was taught in schools as an example of the diverse history of New Mexico. It was referenced in sermons about love and acceptance. It was shared around dinner tables and campfires, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even when the world seems set against you, love can prevail. And always at the heart of the story were those words that Mika had whispered in the cave, barely conscious, frozen and near death, looking up at the stranger who had chosen to save her. I am yours. 3 simple words that contained a universe of meaning, a promise that would span decades and generations, a declaration that love, real love, the kind that transforms and endures, begins with the choice to give yourself completely to another person and trust that they will treasure that gift. Yates and Mika's love story became more than just their own. It became a beacon of hope for interracial couples who faced discrimination and hostility. It became an inspiration for anyone who had ever been told their love was wrong or impossible. It became proof that the barriers humans erect between themselves are artificial and can be overcome by those with the courage to try. Their legacy lived on not just in their descendants, but in the very fabric of the community they had helped to build, a community more open and accepting because of their example. The bridges they had built between the Apache and white communities, between different ways of life and different worldviews, remained standing long after they were gone, strengthened by their sacrifice and their love.